Baby girl, you are so pretty, 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 pretty. Baby girl, you are so pretty, 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 pretty. Females made you just.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. I am Juno.
Oh,
And
I'm Chris.
I do have a list here of questions to ask you, and
Let's knock them out.
yep, if anybody comes in to watch and wants to ask questions in the comments, we will get through those too as well.
Cool.
All right. And we are here to talk about your book. Which book was it? Shadows of the Inferno?
Yep.
Inferno? Awesome. Okay, great. So the first question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Actually, that's a good question, because I haven't thought about that in a long time. Geez, it's been so long since I actually sat down with that book. You know what? Honestly, it's music. Music always inspires the hell out of me, and I love music. My initial goal was always to say I wanted to be a rock star, and that didn't quite work out. So, kind of writing. I always did like writing. I used to playwright in San Antonio and things like that. I fell back into a lot of that stuff, and I love, my favorite band of all time is 9 Inch Nails. Just my favorite all-time band. And of course, as always, I was listening to a lot of 9 Inch Nails, and I was discovering a lot of 9 Inch Nails in music. And I think that there's one song in particular that really stuck with me. And I was also, I think at the time, well, I guess I was listening probably to the Downward Spiral a lot too, and then parts of, oh yeah, I was listening to The Fragile, and there's just a lot of angry music in there. And it, like, one song in particular that stuck out with me, which is from the Natural Born Killer soundtrack called Burn. And it was just so full of rage, and it made me think of the rage of demons. Like, just how pissed they must be all the time. Just their anger that must just bleed off of them in like heat and in waves. And it was really like, I wanted to explore that concept. I really wanted to explore that anger and that rage. And there was also the concept of, I had gotten into a political debate with a friend at the time. And this is back in like 2014. So political debates back then weren't as hostile as they are now. And they were more about like ideals and stuff like that. Like, so we had gotten in this argument about states' rights and federal rights and all that stuff, back when that was like political debate. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it is now. And so I thought it was really interesting, the idea of exploring the concept of the battle between heaven and hell from a purely philosophical debate standpoint, that you would have two sides. You would have one side, one political divide, and one side, but like not so much necessarily good and evil concept, but just ideological, like that they really have a systematic belief difference that at 2014, whatever, when I wrote the book, we saw in politics that had lasted centuries, you know what I'm saying? And so I wanted to explore kind of both those concepts, how you would see that almost political schism, but also explore that concept of the rage and the hostility of demons on one side. And so that, I guess, was basically the metamorphosis of it all, where it all kind of started to spring forth. And then I get like kind of crazy ideas, and I structure all my books like a data structure. I write about that a lot. And I also wanted to explore the concept of chaos. And so if you watch the way the chapters develop, a chaos structure starts with a variable that basically creates other variables and branches out, almost like a flower, like an explosion based upon that one variable. So the story kind of starts like that. It starts small, but then it gets really big. I mean, it starts with a haunted house, but then you go into this big epic battle between heaven and hell. So those were the three main focal points, I think, that were the basis for where I really wanted to start writing that book.
It definitely is a very interesting concept, and I'm the same way with music. Music definitely inspires me as well, so I understand that completely.
I'm always looking for good music to help, further the process. So if you come across some stuff, definitely send it my way and let me know, because that really fires up the creative thought process.
Sure, I could definitely do that. I think I might have a few artists in mind related to around that.
I need good music all the time, so.
Okay. The next question was, what exactly is your writing process, your routine, habits, rituals? We know you listen to music, but what else do you do to get into that writing to get it going?
It's interesting because, like, I've written actually just finished my 7th book. And so you kind of have, like, you have to figure it out with the first book. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing something. And then over time, you kind of develop a process that works for you. And so due to recent health conditions, I don't get to do it quite as intensely as I used to. But what my process used to be, and it's still similar, but I'll just brainstorm. I'll listen to music. I'll write notes. I'll listen to music. I'll write notes. And then after I have it about 10 to 12 pages of notes, I look at those notes and I go and I start to organize them into a narrative structure. So, like, okay, this happens and this happens and this happens. Like, where does this note fall in the scope of things in a coherent manner? And, like, sometimes the note is a phrase, sometimes it's a paragraph, sometimes it's just an idea. And so then when I have all these loose notes of about 12 pages written out, I basically start filling in the blanks in between those notes. So eventually, I basically just keep ironing that out. And then eventually I'll have, a book good to go.
I love that process. It's very simple, but also helps a lot too. I actually heard somebody say that one good thing for helping them write a book was that instead of just writing, they would have a recorder where they would just record all their thoughts into it, and it would transcribe all their thoughts to it, just so they can brain dump without having to, like, write very slow. They just talked and talked into the recorder.
Well, it's interesting because I think so many of these structures are similar. And if you ever listen to, like, Jimi Hendrix lyrics, he writes. Well, first of all, he's a greatest guitarist ever, but he also writes some beautiful lyrics. Go back and listen to, like, Little Wing and Axis Bold as Love and things like that. And what he would do is apparently he just carried a notepad around, like a little tiny notepad, and whenever anything popped in his head, he would just write it down. Just a little phrase, a little sentence here and there. And then when he had a song that he wanted to start writing, he'd pull out that notebook and he had all this material to start going through already. So it's not like you always need to be planning, okay, I'm going to write this book. Let me sit down and write it. You start learning where to find the creative bits and things here and there. And then if you know how to start putting them aside, then you have a lot of material to go when you do start writing. And it makes it so much easier than, I hear aspiring writers and stuff like that. Oh, I can't write and can't write. If you have all the stuff ready to go, it's so much easier than saying, okay, at 12 o'clock today, I'm going to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
That's a challenge, you know what I'm saying? But if you have pages and pages of things to work with, don't hold yourself down to saying, hey, I need to use everything on those pages. But, if you have 50 pages of stuff that you've been just nonsensically writing for the last year, you may find 2 good pages worth of material that you're like, hey, this is going to be the basis of a decent story. And that's part of it too, is learning what to discard and learning what to keep. But, it helps when you're just throwing your ideas out there all the time and saving them. Coming back in handy.
Definitely, especially because inspiration can come from anywhere and anytime.
Exactly.
I am also a person who carries my notebook around. But that actually is extremely good advice. Like myself, I have over 18 stories that I started but never went anywhere with it. And if you think about it, I could really sit down with all those and make a story out of it as well.
See, and that's the thing is don't hold, in my opinion, you don't need to hold yourself to like, you know, it's funny because when I wrote my very first thing ever, it was a play, right? It was very personal to me. It was about things that I experienced growing up. You know, it was about, you know, my mother and things like that. And you know, nobody knew that. But I had been working with a theater company at the time as an actor. And I said, hey, you know, I've got this play that I've written. And and they said, well, you know, we've got this director you should meet, and he can help you with that play. So I wrote the greatest play ever, right? Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant play. And so I met him in this coffee shop. I'll never forget. And I gave him my play. Oh, yeah, I emailed it to him. And so he has my play with him. And so he's sitting there with me in this coffee shop, and he looks at me. He's like, okay, so this is crap. This is crap. This is crap. And he's basically got the pen, and he's just take this out, change this, take this out, change this out. But, you know, part of it is leaving your ego at the door. You know what I'm saying? And I wanted to get good. So I didn't get upset. I didn't get bothered. I just listened. And a lot of that original play, that play is easily the play that has went through the most drafts that I ever wrote. But I left a lot on the cutting room floor. A lot got changed. But by the time that play was performed, that was a pretty damn good play. You know what I'm saying? And I'm proud of it to this day. But what I was going to say is you don't necessarily have to hold on so tight to each little thing. So you may have 18 stories, you know, and you may, what's best for the story, and that's what you've always got, what's best for the total story is you may say like, okay, this small little piece of this story goes with this piece of this story. It's hard for me to lose all this, but it's what's best for the story. And I can pick and pick and pick and pick. And over the course of those 18 stories, you know, you may have just enough in there that you're able to put together something that you're really liking when it's all structured together.
This is all amazing advice, especially like people who want to do this. I do believe that they need to be able to take their criticism like you did. You did it very well, and you created something out of it, and now you have, what, 7 books?
Hopefully
and
7.
it's great advice. Okay. Next question is, how much research goes into writing one of your books?
Not as much as it should. I get lazy sometimes. But one thing that I've done is like, for instance, with my third book, Fields of Frozen Stars, I had kind of, my first story was a ghost story. My second story was basically urban fantasy, magic. And I knew for my third story, I couldn't just like do the same thing as like the underlying backbone of it all. I knew I had to do something different. So I was like, well, if I went in this direction, how do I explain what's going on in the book that's different? And so I was like, well, let me go science. Let me do science fiction, even science. And so, you know, I got on, I don't know if it's Audible at the time. It's Audible now, but they have these learning courses, which are college courses that you can listen to. They're lectures. And so I downloaded lectures of like particle physics and general relativity, and I would just let those play while I did, like, you know, errands and chores and stuff like that. And so you hear things and you're like, well, that's an interesting idea. I didn't realize that, you know what I'm saying? So it actually at times ends up helping to guide your work in the research. And I don't know if I call it research, because it's almost kind of like music. You know, you got music on in the background and it's like sinking into your brain, and it just, you reflect it somehow. You know what I'm saying? You reflect it in your style, you reflect it in your writing, you reprocess it as yourself. And so in my fourth book, I just decided, hey, I'm Latino, let me do something on Mesoamerican history. So You know, I wanted to do something on like the Aztecs. And so I started listening to Mesoamerican, I didn't even know what the subject was called at the time, Mesoamerican history, and through the learning course. You know, it was like 30 lectures on different things. And I realized, hey, well, actually, it's the Mayans instead of the Aztecs who are better for my narrative. So it shifted and it went towards the Mayans. But if we can call it research, because I did have a grounding in actual data, but at the same time, I do get lazy sometimes. There's like probably a bunch of other stuff I should do to, you know, learn. You know, you hear some writers, they go and do like internships and stuff like that. You know, I've never really quite done that. You know, I should probably send my stuff to some experts and be like, does this pass, you know, weight? And but you know, I don't go that far, but I do like to expose myself to some semblance of, you know, factuality.
Well, unrelated to this, just in case you ever need this in the future, did you know that you can like email scientists and ask them questions and they would answer it? Like there's a lot of scientists that you can just email them any questions you need and they would answer it for
Well,
you.
you know, it's interesting because with that fourth book, Spectres of Mist and Sand, which is about Mesoamerican history, I ended up hearing about this scholar, and I really wanted to send him a copy of the book. I haven't got around to it, but he was a really big inspiration into one of the characters in the book. So I don't know if I'll ever get around to that, but you know, it is interesting because you know you do have those experts out there. I have asked a couple experts out there, like, is this plausible? Like, you work in the medical field, or you work in this, is this plausible? Sometimes I don't want to know too much, because if you know too much, it kills your momentum, and it's like, you know, there's a lot of stuff in Hollywood that isn't, you know, spot on sometimes, and you know, but I have reached out to some people on occasion, but I've been lazy. That's all there is to it. I have been lazy when it comes to it, a little bit more than I should have.
That is understandable. And you know, some authors do like making up their own rules in their books, which we do have, you know, where you can make up your own rules in your books, your own facts and things like that. There are certain books that, yeah, sure, you should put the research in, but writing books, you are able to just do whatever you want in it. Okay, next question. Can you give us a brief overview of what readers can expect from your books of Shadows of Inferno, people who haven't read it yet?
A brief overview. Are we talking like just like a book blurb, or are we talking like an extensive-ish overview?
I suppose
Like characters.
basically just what exactly the book is about and
So
like what topic it hits on.
the book, it starts with the concept of a haunted house. And I just really wanted to explore a very Lovecraftian kind of haunted house concept. But then it kind of sets a tone. And that's what I like. I like misdirection. I've always liked misdirection in my books. It's a small story when you think about it, a haunted house. I mean, that was one thing that got me is, I mean, like, as a kid growing up, like, how scary do haunted houses get? You know, it's usually about a murder in a haunted house. It's usually about a ghost or something like that. And I wanted something big. So it starts as a story of a haunted house, but you find out that this haunted house is like the nexus for like one of the greatest battles between heaven and hell, between the devil, Satan, and you know the archangels and everything like that is at the core of this haunted house. And so we learn about the characters who are related to this battle throughout the novel, and that's one thing that I really enjoy about it. And it's about insanity too. I like that. It's about just being crazy, and so that's fun for me.
That is great. Definitely exactly what I said earlier. It's a very interesting concept to have in a book. Those are types of books that I do very much enjoy, and I'm sure there's lots of people who would love to read a book based on the hell and the haunted house and everything that you just described. Which, speaking of, if you want, after we're done with this live, to drop the link so I can copy it also.
Okay.
And we are talking about the book.
Mhm.
And how did you come up with the characters in your book?
Just things I love, you know. I guess that's what it comes down to, is just things I love. Um, there's a character in there who really likes movies, and I love movies. And there's a character in there who really likes music, and I just really love music. And there's a character in there who's just crazy, and you know, I love that aspect of things, but not just crazy for the sake of being crazy, but a very logical type of crazy. And I really, I really, I really liked that concept of that character. You know, they say that there's like a concept of modeling, and for instance, Heath Ledger pulls off one of the greatest performances ever when he did the Joker in The Dark Knight, and I don't think it's really appreciated now as much as it was, because now we've seen various versions of the Joker, like Joaquin Phoenix and things like that. But when Heath Ledger did his Joker, there had never been anything like it. I mean, you just had not seen that interpretation of that character. And in order to get that character, Heath Ledger, they only gave him one comic to reference, The Killing Joke, which is a brilliant comic. And Heath Ledger apparently locked himself in a hotel room for like 2 weeks, and he created what's referred to as the Joker Journal. And it was just every crazy idea he could find out. He put scraps of pictures in this journal, and he created the character from that concept. So when I came up with how I wanted to approach Shadows of the Inferno, I created a screensaver, because that's the thing is you always want something that you can, in my opinion, reference, that keeps you thinking about what you're doing, because it helps you find ideas. So like what I ended up doing was I came up with a background for my iPad, and what it was it had 4 images. It had Trent Reznor from the Downward Spiral era. I found this. I was watching a lot of Peter Gabriel from like the 70s, and that dude was crazy in the 70s. I mean, he got on stage with his face all painted, and he was just crazy. It had Heath Ledger's Joker, and it had A Clockwork Orange, and it had the main guy from The Clockwork Orange. And so for me, those represented 4 things: the confidence, the crazy, the chaos, and the genius. And those were very referential. They became references to one of the main characters of my book. If you read the book, I don't want to get into too much. You know, you may be able to pinpoint which specific character I'm talking to about. But so it was one of those things, like maybe even before I had fully developed the character, I was able to, whenever I was doing things on my iPad, whether I was checking my Facebook real quick, whether I was looking, up something up on Google, the first thing I would see is that picture in the background with all those 4 characters. So those 4 characters became one character, and that one character was basically always reminding me that they were there, and I was able to find different aspects of the character day to day to day, and I just really like that character. To this day, I think of some of the lines that character said that I just liked. I just liked aspects of that character. And so, I gotta admit, a lot of that book for me with the characters I was just fascinated by very different aspects of things, and so that was one of the big driving forces behind the book. There's a lot of different characters, and if you've read the book already, you might be familiar with like the different characters and the different directions that they go in.
So I'm guessing that those 4 characters were your biggest inspiration as far as characters and people go towards this book?
Well, those 4 characters in the picture that I'm referencing became one character. There was a certain numeric thing that is important in the book as far as the number of characters. And so some of those characters were kind of offshoots of needing to hit a certain number that's important in the book. And when people read it, they'll understand what I mean by that. But of that numeric amount, a handful of those characters were characters that I was very intrigued by. And that's probably why they get the most face time in the book, is because I was just really intrigued by, I'm a very visual person, so I was very intrigued by the design of those characters too. I could visualize them very well in my mind. And so that was a big part of the importance of those characters and me propelling them through the story.
And what was the most challenging aspect of writing your book?
Well, that goes back to the writing process is, like I said, due to certain health reasons now, I don't get to do it as much, but I used to drink a lot of coffee, like a lot of I used to drink a coffee called Jet Fuel, and 3 cups of jet fuel, I pump out 5,000 words a day, easy. So when I used to write during that period, I could probably write a book in about 6 weeks. But there's a thing that Napoleon said. He said, plan, 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 and then execute, 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 execute. And so, kind of back to my strategy about when you do those notes. When you do those 12 pages of notes and then you arrange them, you kind of spend so much time planning that when you're ready to write, you can just knock it out. It's just a matter of having the time and being able to sit down with it. And so when I'm ready to write, the book's done, when I have that many notes. And so luckily, I don't tend to meet hiccups when I'm actually ready to write. I work it out all in my mind during that brainstorming, note-taking process. And then by the time I'm ready to sit down and write, it typically goes pretty smoothly.
There was actually a question in the comments related to coffee. It asked if you still drank death coffee.
No, unfortunately, I can't. I don't know, how many people know this of me, but I just had a heart attack last year. So I just got permission from the doctor, in November, to even be allowed to drink coffee anymore. And so, by coffee, I mean 1 cup of just regular weak coffee. I should probably be doing it once a week type of situation. So yeah, I don't get to indulge in those 3 cups of jet fuel a day adventures anymore, unfortunately. So my last book was written without a majority of coffee. So that, I think it's come out pretty well, but sure would have enjoyed more coffee with it.
So is there anything you do now instead of coffee to help you get that process up? Maybe music does actually get you going like that?
My process is there enough that it can get me from point A to point B. So, it's a little bit tougher and that's the thing, is I have not really sat down and wrote a book in about 5 years, 6 years. This was my first one. In between that time, I've had 2 sons. There was a pandemic that nearly destroyed all life on Earth or whatever. I work full time, and I just got my second college degree. So it's been pretty challenging, And then I had a heart attack, and so this was my first time seeing if I could write another book,
Mm-hmm.
And so the biggest challenge of it all, with all that going on, particularly with 2 kids, is finding the time to write it. It's really hard to take time away from your kids and say, hey, daddy's gonna go write for 4 hours, and so that was a challenge. And I'm glad the 7th book is done. I'm currently sending it out to literary agents now. But that's been the biggest challenge. challenge. You know, I wouldn't mind when I did do coffee again. When my doctor gave me the thumbs up, I was pretty much going into my second draft of the book, and the coffee helped a lot. But the bigger challenge this time was just finding the time.
Definitely is understandable. Hey, but we already know exactly what the book is about, but is there any specific message that you were hoping that your readers took away from it?
This is gonna sound crazy, but I don't know. I think the message is just to fall in love with certain things. Even though it's a horror story, even though it's like a ghost story, even though it's about heaven and hell, you know, you have characters in there who fall in love with things. You know, they even the bad guy, you know, even the bad guy falls in love with an idea. And you know, I think that ideas and beliefs are very important. And I think that's an underlying, you know, and actually I've never thought about it into our discussion right now, but I think that's a big underlying theme of the book is that the love of ideas and the love of things that are sacred to you. And I think that's something that's very important to all the characters,
That is
even when they don't
a great
realize it.
message. So how do you approach world building or creating a setting in your story? Does it just like come to your mind or?
You know, I think it's interesting because I think if you tend to compare modern storytelling, modern books versus books from like 100 years ago or whatever, and you know, maybe it's just me too at times, I think that there's a different literary tone in how things are approached. I think that stories 100 years ago, if you read them, they tend to have a lot of very narrative structure of environment. So like I used to joke, and of course I'll never ever compare myself to like a Stephen King or anything like that. But if you read like a Stephen King book, he will have a character go into a room, and then he'll spend like 3 pages talking about everything in that room. You know what I'm saying? He'll be like, and there was a picture on the wall that was taken by a farmer who lived on a thing. They had driven by the road, and that farmer had come out with the camera. And that's just like a picture, like has nothing else to do with the story. It's just like the picture on the wall. And then he's like, and then there was an ornament that hung from a desk drawer that was from a Christmas 10 years ago that was like this, and this. I don't have the mental capacity for that. I'm like, and so the character went in the room and he saw a guy there. That's like my whole thing. Like he went in the room, he saw this guy start talking. You know, I think you see a little bit more of that now in books that I read, but I think that the world, and because of that, I think that the world building tends to be different. And maybe it's just the type of books I read, but I think if you think of like a Tolkien or something, he's like, I think he takes like a whole chapter, like this is Middle Earth, and these are where the elves live, and these are where so I think that for me, the world building is lyrical. Is I fell in love with like Clive Barker. I like Neil Gaiman. I like the British writers in general had a very lyrical style of writing. I read Reworld by Clive Barker when I was like 12, and that book was like very impactful for me. And it like the world that he builds starts like a poem. He goes, you know, nothing ever begins. There is no moment when this or any other story starts. And like then he goes on this whole paragraph of like just the building of a story, of a fairy tale. And I like that. And so I think that music helps with that, because when you're listening to good music, good lyricists, you know, there's the difference between saying he brushed his arm against her shoulder and saying she endured his touch. You know what I'm saying? Like she didn't really want, but that endured. That word has a certain weight, has a certain type of. And I'm thinking about a poem I read by Yeats where he used that term, endured, and or Yeats, and I never know how to say that one, but I think that type of lyrical verbiage, I think, helps me to build a world. I think that's what I strive for. Is I strive to build a poetic world, even if it's a horrific world. I want it to be poetic.
I love that personally. Okay. What do you hope your readers remember most about your book?
Well, I can't tell because some of that's spoilers. So I guess I don't get to do Facebook and stuff as much as I used to, and now I've got that poem stuck in my head and said, and then endured her fingers' touch. Was On a Political Prisoner, I believe was the name of that poem. But I don't get to get on Facebook as much as I used to, but there was because the kids, and work and things like that. But there was a reader who, when that book came out, quoted one of my main characters in there, and I was like, "That's the character. That's the scene." You know what I'm saying? I'm like, that's my favorite part. That's what I liked with that right there. That was what it was all about for me ultimately. And like I said, I can't go into it too much because of spoilers, but that's what it was. It's that scene. And I guess what it comes down to, if there's anything that I can hang my hat on, is I just like the madness of it. I think there's a certain degree of madness in that book that I just really love. I think that everybody in there is kind of bat shit crazy, and I like that.
Does make a lot of sense, and that is definitely something that I would enjoy as well, and I hope other people would enjoy things like that as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, so have you ever faced criticism or negative feedback about this specific work, and how did you handle it personally?
Luckily, not that one. I mean, I'm not gonna say. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who read it and thought it sucked, but I haven't personally heard about it. Maybe I will after this video. I don't know. Maybe somebody's gonna be like, "Well, now that you mention it," but not in particular this book. I did get a pretty bad feedback on my second book once. That was like, ugh. But I mean, ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it. There's always gonna be somebody who doesn't like what you do. Somebody's not gonna like who you are. You know what I'm saying? Somebody's not gonna like your style. Somebody's not gonna like your ideas. Or so I try not to let that get too much to me. Honestly, I'm just flattered at all that anybody takes time to read my books. I think that I think a lot of, and I've been exposed to other writers and this and that, and where they get mad because like, oh, well, somebody didn't do this, or somebody didn't want to buy my book, or somebody didn't want, and it's like, people don't owe you their money, they don't owe you their time. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot in people's lives. I have kids, people have kids, people have jobs. You know what I'm saying? So for somebody to take the time to read your book, for somebody to take the time, you hope that they like it. You can't control if they do or don't. Sometimes, I'm just not a big fan of, like spinach. Doesn't mean spinach is bad. I just don't like it that much. You know what I'm saying? And so, that's no disrespect to people who grow spinach or whatever. But it's not my thing. And there's a lot of foods like that, and it's like it doesn't make them bad. It's just not for me.
I love that mindset. Okay. I did read, I believe my favorite book at the time. This was a couple years ago when I read the book. The one with the train. Do you know which book I'm talking about? I can't remember names. I'm not really good at names, but there's the one with the train. I really enjoyed that book, and I sometimes still think about it.
Oh, that's cool. And just to be clear, you're talking about my book, right?
Yes.
No, that would be Haunting of Rosehaven. Actually, that's an interesting story. That's my first book, and you'll see it's different. I always, in my opinion, a writer learns to write, and then they learn to say F it, and that's when they just do their own style, right? So I always say, like, in the first book, you learn the rules, and in the second book, you just kind of start breaking them all, right? And in my opinion, no disrespect to anything, Clive Barker is my favorite writer, probably ever. And if you look at Clive Barker's Damnation Game, which is probably, I believe, his first book, not short stories, but book, it's kind of a very simplistically structured book. And then he goes on to write Weaveworld, which is my all-time favorite book, and that book is just crazy. It's just awesome. It's urban fantasy, very lyrical, firing on all sides. Actually, we just recently read it, and it's such a great book. And Haunting of Rosehaven was my first book, and it's a very simple ghost story, in my opinion. And they say when you're starting to write what you know. And so I set that book in the area I grew up in. I grew up in a small town, Louisiana. And so I wrote it in a small town in Louisiana. But that comes from an urban legend in the city I live in now, San Antonio, Texas. And when I moved to San Antonio, Texas, a very long time ago now, because I'm very old, there's an urban legend of some train tracks that if you go on the train tracks and you put your car in neutral, that the ghosts of children will push you off the train tracks. That's where the whole legend in the book is the legend in San Antonio, Texas, is that there was a train crash with a bus full of kids. All the streets are named after kids. If you park your car, they push you off and you put the handprints. So I basically melded those two ideas. But I will say that when I moved to San Antonio many, many years ago, some friends took me out to those train tracks, and we did that exact thing, that we put the car neutral, and the car moved. And so this was about probably close to 10 years before I ever sat down and wrote that book. But that event when we went out there. But I remember sitting in that car, and after we were driving away, I looked in the back window, and I told myself, wouldn't it be freaky if I saw a little boy standing in the street right now? Like, wouldn't that be terrifying? And that story stuck, that idea stuck with me. And that became that book. That right there. And when I finally sat down, it was completely based on that idea of that experience that we had. And what if I saw that little boy in that back window? And then years later, when I wrote down the book, I just set that story in. Because to me, it made more sense being in a small town than in a big city. Because there would be more of a legacy. There would be more of a sense of haunting.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and that's definitely one of the reasons why I love that book. I'm definitely a big fan of things like mythical creatures, ghosts, things that some people don't believe in and some other people do believe in. Me personally, I believe in those sort of things, legends, mythical creatures. I believe in all that myself. So that is also one of the reasons why I loved that book.
Well, it's kind of funny because I grew up on a lot of that stuff, right? The
Mhm.
whole mythical creatures, urban legends, and all that stuff like that. So I've been pretty fortunate because my third book starts to include UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster. You know what I'm saying? Like I grew up on the Loch Ness Monster. I just thought that was cool. And so I was able to incorporate ideas like this, as I got older and as I started writing my book. So, that's stuff that I've very much enjoyed and things like that. And personally, far as like these things existing, I think that there's a lot we don't know in this world, and I am not even gonna try to mess with it because I don't want to be on the wrong side of something. So
Honestly, same.
I'm not even messing with it.
It's good to think about, probably not good to mess with it and go into it.
Exactly. I'm not gonna be the wrong guy. Like if I think a house is haunted, I'm just gonna move. I don't want to. Oh, it's not. Let's move. You know, time to.
Yes.
Although it'll probably be easier to move out of a haunted apartment than a haunted house these days.
So, what is the most rewarding experience you had as an author so far?
Rewarding experience. You know, I got to go back to my small town a few years back, and that was pretty cool. I got to give a presentation in the library and the local library, and got like a little tour by you know the head of the library and stuff like that, and took some pictures, and that was kind of cool. You know, I used to have a lot of readers send me pictures. I still get those sometimes. So that's been pretty cool. It's nice to see somebody with your book. That was always a big thing for me. So you know, I do like the good reviews, but you know, just having anybody take the time to read your book, I think, is the biggest reward. You know, like I said, that's a big driving force to me. Is, you know, like I said, people's lives are busy. They got a lot going on. So if anybody takes the time to read your book, that's just very appreciated.
So,
Especially
to
if
you then, it's very important for a reader and author interaction, like book club signings, social media discussions, like we're doing now, guest posting, and all those sort of things.
Definitely. I mean, yeah. I mean, you're not. I mean, yeah, you could call yourself a writer, and I'm not going to disparage anybody who does, but you know, it's really that much more rewarding to be a writer when you have readers. You know what I'm saying? When you have readers who are actually, you know, willing to take the time to read your work. You know, so I mean, honestly, right now, I've worked on my 7th book. I just finished it. I'm sending it off to literary agents. I'm taking a different kind of course with my career right now. I want to elevate it a little bit. And ultimately, it's not about money. It's not about anything like that. It's just, I want my work to be seen. You know, I want people to be reading my work. And I think that's the most important thing, especially for me right now where I'm in love. It would be cool to have people just reading, you know.
Okay, that is great. Oh, already did that one. So, how do you know when your book is finished, and what strategies do you use to like revise it and polish it up?
After 6 books, I'm a little bit more confident now in having a good idea of what I need, in my opinion, like understanding the beats of the story, understanding the structure, understanding kind of the character development and where things need to go. I do have a reader or two who I will reach out to and say like, hey, can you take some time and read this manuscript and tell me what you think? And that's like typically after like the first draft. Sometimes I've done it in like halfway through a first draft, at the beginning of first draft, because you know I always use this analogy as a writer is just because something's clear to you, don't assume that it's clear to the reader. You need to learn to articulate. That's part of the art, in my opinion, is articulating your ideas. And I have seen writers who have put like the onus, the burden on the reader when the reader got a different opinion. So like I have seen writers be like, oh, they just didn't understand. They just didn't get it. They didn't understand what I was trying to say. They just didn't get it. Like, well, part of it is your job to make them get it. You know what I'm saying? And so I would the analogy I always use is I may write about a square, and I may just write this story about a square. And if I present that book to you, and you're like, man, that book was the greatest book about a circle that I've ever read. And it's like, oh, then I did something wrong, you know. And it's, I actually experienced this once when I was in theater, where this director that I worked with, she was just one of the best directors I'd ever seen. She was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant director. And she directed this short play, and it was about a lawyer meeting a client. And the whole audience, and I got to see it from the audience at one point, was just laughing and laughing. They were like, oh man, this is genius. This is the greatest play ever. We were all laughing. We were like, oh, this performance, this is awesome. And I'll never forget, after the play, people were asking, because I had written one of the plays too. They were asking her, like, well, what did she think? You know, what did she goes, well, I was surprised by the audience reaction because I didn't think it was a comedy. So I felt kind of bad for her, but I understood to a certain extent that, you know, that was kind of her doing, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, it goes back to that circle and square analogy. Is if I'm trying to tell you a story and put a square in your brain, and you come back to tell me, oh, that was the greatest circle I ever read about, I did something wrong. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I need to go back and I need to look at that. So, you know, typically in the first draft, or sometimes after a few chapters, if I'm not sure, I will present it basically to a reader and say, are you seeing a square? Well, I don't tell them, but I let them tell me if they're seeing a circle or a square. You know what I'm saying? So, so that's important to me, because sometimes you're too close to it and you really need that third person or that other person to tell you, yeah, this is this and this is that. So you can kind of deduce, okay, maybe I need to tweak that up and really show that that's a square object and not a circle object.
Awesome. Okay. And do you have any tips, well, besides what we went over today, any other tips, advice, or lessons for aspiring authors that are from any ages?
You know, the number one question that I get that always kind of gets to me is like, I would say gets to me, but that I note is people will often ask me, basically, like, well, how do I start writing it? How do I write? And I once had somebody message me, and I'm not, you know, trying to be dismissive, but like, they were like, you know, have you ever had an idea in your brain that you really just want to get out, and you really just want to write it, and you just want to write it and make a book out of it and this and that? How do you do that? And it's like, just write it. Just write it. Just, you know, I use the old Nike slogan, just do it. The one thing that I say is it's better to fix something that's bad than to spend all your time trying to think of how to make something perfect. I would rather sit down for an hour and write the worst thing on earth and then look at it and then figure out how I can make it better than to spend all my time thinking about, like, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. And I mean, that's probably been my number one driving force, but I think that's the biggest lesson really to take, is just write it. They say that writing is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. I totally believe that. Everybody wants to be a writer, or most people want to be a writer, you know. Everybody gets that moment, you've had a bunch of coffee, like, oh, I'm going to write a book. It's not that moment that makes you a writer. It's when you don't want to write. It's when you're not having that, oh, I need to do this. It's when you just sit down, you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then it's easier to fix what's not working. I mean, it's easier to go back and look at what you put out and be like, you know, this needs to change, and this needs to change, and this needs to change. And don't be afraid to fail. I mean, don't be afraid to fail. That's how you get better. like I said, that first play that I wrote got torn to shreds, and it ended up being pretty decent, and I learned a lot. And the learning was probably the most important aspect of it all.
That's awesome advice. Like anyone can have an idea, but not everyone can just put it together and make a product out of it.
Yeah, and it's not just about putting it together, though. It's about keeping at it.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping at it. Like, just not giving up on it.
Yes, I definitely agree. Let's see. And your book that we're talking about today, where can readers find this online or in a bookstore? Like, where can they find the book personally? And are they able to connect you, and how would they be able to connect to you?
The best way to connect to me is either my fan page, Christopher St. John Sampayo, or even my Facebook page, Christopher St. John Sampayo. The book is currently available on Amazon and through Kindle. I'm currently, like I said, I'm going through a literary agent. I'm looking for a new literary agent right now to kind of restructure things is the game plan. Like I said, with kids now, I really want to hopefully, up the ante, not just for myself, but for them, give my kids a little bit of a legacy there more, like with their dad being a writer and stuff like that. I have unfortunately not been able to focus as much on the writing over the last few years because of all those things I listed out as much as I'd like to. So, I'm definitely interested in anybody who's interested reaching out to me. I will say this, I get crazy ideas, whether they're from coffee or whatever. I'm putting together a little project that will be appearing within the next couple weeks. So definitely add me, anybody who's interested. You can find me on TikTok, and you can find me on Instagram. I'm even doing threads, and it's at Chris_Sampayo_author. And I'll post the link at the bottom of this also. And hopefully, like I said, I have not, it's really hard for me, unfortunately, now. I'm kind of in a one-man band type of situation as far as promoting my books, unlike I was, where I had a lot more time and ability, 6-7 years ago when these books were coming out. But I'm really hopeful that in the next year or so that there'll be a lot more activity, a lot more movement, and I'm really excited about the 7th book. So hopefully, there'll be some upcoming news on that front. I did get, so I can't talk a lot about different things, but I've gotten some good professional news, career news as far as writing in the last few weeks. So I'm trying to be, I'm optimistic about things, and hopefully, we'll see more things come to pass. But currently on Amazon and on Kindle, anybody who's interested, add me on TikTok and Instagram at Chris Sampayo, at Chris_Sampayo_author.
Awesome. Yeah, the last question I had was about the future projects that you would like to share, and you did just say that you have a project that should be coming out in several weeks. Is there any other projects you would like to share out, or nothing yet?
Like I said, if there's anybody who is just like a fan of books and stuff like that, like not even say books, reading, like I said, definitely look for me on TikTok right now and Instagram. I have a project that I'm really kind of interested to see how it goes. Like, I think sometimes the 1% inspiration with me is a little bit higher than it needs to be, a little bit more powerful. So sometimes I think ideas are probably better than they are. Who knows? But I'm really excited kind of about this idea that I think is ready to go. So hopefully that'll be popping up in the next 2 weeks.
Can't
2
wait
weeks. And so,
to hear more about it.
yeah. And so definitely be on the lookout for those, any who are interested. And but the 7th book is very relevant to times, to our modern times, I think. And I'm really excited about the way the book came together. Like, and by came together, I'm saying like after I sat back and I was like, wow, this actually took a different direction than I was initially anticipating, but I like it. So, I'm really optimistic about it. So hopefully, I'm exploring what avenues of distribution there are for that one, and so hopefully I'll know more in about 5 to 6 months, and we'll see how things are in a year.
Awesome. Very exciting. I actually believe that was the last question I had on my page. First, is there anything else you would like to add before we look at the comments here? By the way, guys, if anybody else is here and they want to add comments, go ahead. I'll be reading them.
Nothing I can think of. Just sorry that I had those technical glitches at the beginning. This is my first time using this live.
It's all good. It's also my first time, you know, but glad we made it work. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna look here and see if there was any other things. Okay. The question was asked, what's your new book about? Where she said it went with time.
And I'm debating like how much do I want to share about this one. One thing that you'll see about me is I kind of have like big ideas that I wedge into a specific genre.
Mhm.
And so like when we talked about Shadows of the Inferno, it's kind of a big concept to me, at least, about ideas of ideological differences. It's really ideologies, insanity, two diametrically opposed groups. I mean, I really wanted to make it philosophical in principle that these two sides are going at each other. And I took that idea and I wedged it into an attempt at a horrific nightmare of a story. So on the surface, somebody's like, oh, it's a story about a ghost house. It's a story about a haunted house. I mean, as you read more, you find out it's not. But, you know, on the surface, it's maybe something like that. With this current book, there is a similarity in that it explores, I think, things that we see a lot now, with corporations, the ruling class, what I would refer to them as, the ruling class being the billionaires who are making all our rules. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they decide a lot more than I think we give them credit for. I mean, they control all the newspapers, all the social networks these days. They control the space race between, you know, the richest. You know, I don't think we've seen anything quite like that in our society. Not since feudal times. Not since kings and queens made all the decisions have we seen a class making all our decisions quite like they are now. And my book explores that, but in a very unique manner. Kind of very similar to the way that those ideological, diametrically opposed sides were battling each other through a horror story and about demons in a haunted house in Shadows of the Inferno. This book kind of explores those ideas in a unique manner also.
Very excited to read it. Let's see. Okay, and the last question that is here asked, the Crystal fans are still a thing, right?
I don't know yet, simply because so much has changed, you know. I'm taking it one step at a time. There's been a lot of scattering there, you know. to where, and then I mean, part of it is unfortunately it's a lot happened. You know, the pandemic changed so much. You know, I don't think that it's really easy to recollect how different things became, you know, since the pandemic. And so when that occurred, um, then, you know, with my kids, I haven't been able to I haven't been able to connect as much as I used to. I used to be on Facebook all the time, and I enjoyed it. I made some some great friendships, friendships that I cherish still. You know, I have friends who passed away. I have friends who passed away a couple years ago that I still cherish. That I only knew them through Facebook, and we had very good connections. And so I have not been able to connect as much as I used to. I have not been able to check up, unfortunately, on my friends as much as I used to be able to. So as far as where the current status of the Crystal fans are, I don't know how they are. You know, I felt kind of bad because there was a plan in place when the Crystal fans were really, and for those of you who don't know, the Crystal fans were a wonderful group of people who were what I am fortunate enough to almost say were a fan club of mine. Super, super supportive. Um, they were always promoting my work as much as possible, always telling friends about my books. We stayed in touch very regularly. And we even had like T-shirts made. We had regularly they would get merchandise. Preparing that stuff at times took time, and kind of at the height of the Crystal fans, um, I started getting a lot of book promotion stuff lined up to go, and not just book promotion stuff like online, but also like book signings and going to different bookstores and things like that. And then the pandemic hit, and then the world shut down for like a good 2 years almost. And it was longer for me because I had kids that couldn't leave the house because they didn't have a vaccine yet. And, you know, they were newborns and things like that. And so I didn't get to do any of those planned things because all that was like literally planned in 2019 to 2020. And then COVID-19 takes out in November of 2019, and it really hits the United States in like March of 2020. So it kind of ground so much to a halt, and I have not been able to do a lot of follow-up there. I've kind of tinkered and explored, but I unfortunately I don't know. I don't necessarily know how everybody is doing is in the way that I used to. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to keep track with as many people. There's still some that I do, you know, say hello to, and then we still talk from time to time. But I mean, the group was pretty decent sized for a while, and you know, unfortunately, over the years, we just a passing high here and there. And I feel bad too because a big part of it too was there was supposed to be a big launch of promotions, and then I was kind of already ready to write the seventh book back then, and I just finished it, and that was, you know, after 5 or 6 years. So I don't know how much of the momentum, you know, there is with that. If things go as well as I hope they will with the the seventh book, then yes, the Crystal fans, I'll remember who was there at the very beginning. I really, really will. And I am grateful for them. I'm still grateful for them. And if they are out there still supporting me, I appreciate it. And I would love to start hearing from them more regularly again. And believe me, they're first on my mind if things start to go well. And even as I'm talking to agents and stuff like that, I do still mention the Crystal fans and things like that, and how wonderful they always have been.
I am really hopeful for your future, and I'm very excited for where things are going.
Fingers
Comment
crossed.
says, well, I'm still here. That was from Yari.
Well, thank you much.
And that was our last question, so I guess that concludes everything.
Well, had a wonderful time. It was great chatting.
Yes, it was awesome. Thank you for meeting with me.
It was a great experience. And it's great learning how to use Facebook Live.
Yes, definitely. Definitely make sure you put your links in the comments, and I will definitely copy paste them, and I will be messaging you later also.
All right. Sounds great.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.